Thank you for joining with me again. It's very encouraging, and I've said probably every one of these that I've made that it's great to know that there are those who would take the time to consider these matters, all coming from the statement that's made in the Old Testament, 2 Chronicles 7:14. You've heard that before. Be sure to understand the context in which that is given. And now we're looking for the application of that statement in the New Testament church, and particularly in the American church. And so the last phrase in that statement there is, "I will heal the land." And what is that in the Old Testament? We looked at that, and what could that be now in the New Testament? And it surely refers to the dirt. We talked about the land itself, the material land, and all the wonderful things that have come from the land known as the United States, and how it has sustained and kept the people here, the people that have moved here, the people that have wanted to come live here. And we just, all of us who've been born here, been privileged to live here and have the benefits of the prosperity of the land itself. But then what about the land as far as protection from foreign enemies in the Old Testament, and those people who would invade the Old Testament church, Israel, and try to destroy that? Yes, and have we benefited as the church in America from that very same thing from living here? Yes, we have. And this land has been benefited by the presence of the Old Testament church, of the New Testament church, and hopefully will continue to be so. But in the last several hundred years of this nation we live in, there's been no real serious invasion of territory. We've been protected from foreign enemies and those kinds of things that would destroy our culture. But there is some concern about the drift of the culture internally, and that's what I've been trying to deal with. And so there were some changes going on. First of all, we talked about the actual physical changes of where people are living, moving from the rural farming community life into the urban centers, where right now estimated 83%, a little over 80% of most families in the United States are going to be living in an urban center. And then number two, we looked at the issue of, or the critical issue of family life, and how do you, marriage particularly, how do you form the smallest, most important community that there is, and that is the relationship between a man and a woman with children. And we've seen over the last, I've gone back, I think I told you, I've gone back probably 100 years, 120 years, first part of the 20th century, to look at what's been going on. And I've taken a lot of this. I've got a file on marriage that goes back about 30 years, but I also got some books here that also deal with marriage. One in particular I've become familiar with, Alienated America by Timothy Carney. And here's what Timothy Carney says, that he has collected a vast amount of research in different topics. And here's what he says: the most profound social change in America over the last 2 decades, or two generations, which could be as long as 80 years, has been the retreat from marriage. And so we find then this stability of family structure between a man and a woman and children has radically changed in the United States during this period of time, at least maybe 80 to 100 years. Divorce is more likely to occur in the middle class, statistically we find out, than in the larger population. This group, which was once the bedrock of solid marriages and longevity in marriage, now finds more divorce than ever. Now, the issue of divorce, there is some debate about that. I just I want to call this to your attention here. This is a book that I came in touch with just recently, and Shante Fieldhahn, and she is a social scientist, social researcher, graduated from a prestigious school and everything, but she says the good news about marriage, and then her subtitle is Debunking Discouraging Myths About Marriage and Divorce. You may want to look at that whenever you get an opportunity. So if you apply certain numbers and statistics to from various sources, you get different ideas. And no doubt divorce has increased. Now, what the percentage is and relative to the population, and also what is the percentage of divorces in the American church. That's another interesting a bit of information we might want to look at, but you might want to look at. But I think there's a growing number of children that are living with not both biological parents, but they're living with different adults, maybe their mom or their dad. But the blended family has become more and more, I think, statistically larger than it has been in the past, and it creates a lot of difficulties and adjustments for children, of course. So, what's the Carney's book and some other sources? What's the reason for this demise in marriage between a man and a woman, built upon a commitment to live together for the rest of their life? There's at least four that I've found. I've shared with you. The sexual revolution. The sexual revolution did a lot of things, one of which was to separate sexuality, sexual relationships between men and women, to separate that from marriage itself. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. And then number two, what about this male unemployment factor that affects marriages? It undermines marriages. And what about the idea that men then, because of their challenge and maybe in some cases don't have the skills and the inability to keep up with the changes that's going on in the workforce, the workplace, then what's happening there? Then they're pretty much not leading families anymore. We talked about maybe the idea that there's going to be a radical change. It is a radical change in the roles of men and women in family life because of men maybe having to kind of drop out of the role of leadership in the family. Number three was, this is interesting, that families are becoming more and more disengaged from society or community life. Now, you may not recognize this in the community you live in, because I guess the smaller the community, you might see more of an adhesiveness or connectedness of families to families. But when you get the larger, more urban metropolitan areas, it's possible that you would find this disconnectedness. And this came out of the National Marriage Project. It's on the campus of University of Virginia, and Brad Wilcox headed up there. And I've got a quote here that says he has seen this in his research. Families being disconnected from churches, from unions and veterans administrations, veterans organizations and athletic groups and things like that. So those are very important activities that go on in community life. And for me personally, it's going to be churches. It's going to be what is the role of church to preserve Christian marriage, also to preserve Christian families, and how they can continually, the church is challenged in this day to continue to connect families together and to make sure they stay together and become building communities together. Very critically important. Number four, then, of course, the redefinition of marriage in the 2015 decision by the United States Supreme Court to redefine the term marriage and to include a marriage between men and women and women. So we have a different definition of the word marriage. And so I took you back. Those are four things, four factors at least. And then we went back to Genesis 2. And we also went back to the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and we showed that there's the permanency of marriage, and the commitment to marriage is a biblical concept, and it's critical to the basis for society as a whole. If you have very weak marriages between men and women, and in their children, and the relationship in building strong marriages there between husbands and wives, you're going to have an effect on the society as a whole. We're going to continue to look at that. I also gave you about 7 benefits or 7 advantages for having marriage between a man and a woman. It's this building this community. It's this compatible human sexuality. You have common genetics, you have common structural form, skeletal form, organs, and those kind of things. Yet there's unique differences in the chemistry and in the structure in the form of men and women. Reproduction is going to be another great benefit for marriage, and then the transmission of stories and those kind of traditions from one generation to the next. That's critically important. And then it gives us the definition of how you can actually have this relationship between men and women, and it not be a competitive relationship, but one which is going to be between them, and it's going to be a harmonious relationship. And that's going to be based upon number 6, the authentic definition of love. And what is that definition? Of course, from the biblical perspective, and that's going to be critical to building this relationship between family life. And then, of course, if you are a Christian and you want to have a deeper, a greater impact, and not only in the relationship between the husband and the wife, but the impact on future generations, the husband is wanting to gain the image of Christ and learn what that means, and the woman wants to gain the image of the church and learn exactly what that means and those roles that both of them have. This is very critically important. I did all that now in the last. Let me say one other thing. About that. Any other physical relationship between men and women is detrimental. Any other physical relationship between men and women outside marriage, biblical marriage. Now, I'll say marriage, Genesis 2:24. That's, I think, the definition of marriage for all cultures, for all times. You look that up. Man leaves father and mother. He is joined to this woman who is his wife, and they become one flesh. That process right there is to be for all cultures throughout human history, because that's the original couple. That's the original two people on the earth who formed this first community. And so this is what I'm referring to, any other physical relationship between men and women is detrimental, with multiple erroneous consequences to all involved. Any other physical relationship is deviant and it's abnormal. These words I've thought about, see what you think. Any other physical relationship outside marriage, Genesis 2:24. Any other definition of marriage outside that, any other relationship between men and women, men, women, whatever, anything outside is deviant and abnormal. I'll maybe tell you later where I get that word abnormal. Now, those are two things. Changing of the culture, moving into the urban centers. Number 2, the changing of marriage. That's the greatest social change, some people believe, in the last 2 generations. And number 3, closely related to this is childbearing. And then, of course, what's related to that is going to be the sanctity of human life. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier. I just mentioned it again. This is out of a publication called The Economist. And quote, the pill, which was approved in America in 1960, allowed women to regulate their fertility. It used to be common for women to drop out of college when they became pregnant. Now they can time their babies to fit with their careers. Now that's just not only with women who are going to higher education or going beyond high school. It can be anywhere, with any age woman at any time. Continue to quote, the ability to defer children is one of the reasons why 23% of married American women with children now out-earn their husbands. It's as up from 4% in 1960. See the radical change? Well, when this method of controlling fertility in women came out, and you see this increase now in the amount of earnings for women in the United States. A few women in rich countries now need a man's support to raise a family. Now, they may want one, but they really don't. They don't need one. End of quote. See now why men maybe aren't needed as much maybe in the last several generations. Why men are having struggle keeping up with the workforce, and why men now are seeing maybe, well, I'm not needed to bear children, or maybe I am, but only at the convenience of a woman. It's all impacting family life in a very negative way. This is from the Communicable Disease Center in 2018. What about the birth rate? The birth rate again in 2018 fell. It's the lowest number of births in 32 years. Not since 1986 has the United States seen so few babies born. And this, they say, is an ongoing slump, being the fourth consecutive year, this is 2018, fourth consecutive year of birth declines. I found this comment by Dowell Myers. He's a demographer at the University of Southern California. He says this is a national problem. He says that the birth rate is a barometer of despair, saying that young people will not make plans to have babies unless they're optimistic about the future. After a slight rise in birth rate in 2020, the birth rate has taken a nosedive. According to all economic standards, he says, with the exception of high rising costs, birth rates should be rising with the prosperity and those kind of things, and more earnings and that kind of thing, more income. You would think it would be rising. This latest birth rate puts the United States further away from a viable replacement rate. This is the standard for a generation being able to replicate its numbers. In order to reproduce itself, you got to have, I think, more than 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, something like that, children per couple. The United States has generally fallen short of this level since 1971. This is an article from the Communicable Disease Center in May 2019. Just got this from our local paper. In fact, yesterday. In a recent that's birth rate. Now here's population, which they go together, of course. In a recent report on the population of the United States, the United States Census Bureau reported that the population grew the slightest in the last 120 years. This stagnant growth, and it's been going on since in the past, could be, and then they say, the article said it could be due to immigration restrictions. It could be due to a dip in fertility, of course, what we just talked about, birth rate, fertility, and it could be due to this virus that's been spreading around in the United States and taking people's lives, and also causing fear among people, maybe to even have children. So this is the birth rate is gradually going down in the United States. Therefore, we have a slight increase in population, not enough maybe to replicate ourselves and to create enough people in the next generation to take care of the ones who are the older ones in the previous generations. Here's what I think is the reason. Since 1973, they went back to 1960. Since 1973, and the infamous U.S. Supreme decision there in the court there to legitimize abortion on demand in the United States, in that Roe versus Wade decision, over 61 million children have been systematically and premeditatedly murdered. So you have a whole generation and more, possibly, of children that could have been born, hopefully to good families, but those children could have been born, and they could have been a part of the rising population. Statistically, I don't know if that make a significant difference. We had 61 million new members of this culture, hopefully, would be a good thing. And yeah, it would be a good thing. You wouldn't want to kill children. You would want to birth them and bring them into families that were stable, hopefully. And these people that use this excuse that since we're not having a good relationship, or it's not convenient and that kind of thing, so let's terminate the pregnancy. Let's kill the baby. There's no legitimate reason for killing children, either in the womb or outside the womb. And by the way, we're having that, I think. We're having more child abuse. I don't have any statistics on that. You can look this up. I think children are more expediency, and if they get in the way, they can be terminated both in the womb or outside the womb. It's a horrible, horrible situation. One abortion every 96 seconds in the United States. We decry other cultures in other countries in the 20th century for their genocide. We decry the Russians and the Germans who slaughtered Jews, and also the Chinese, Mao Revolution and the Pol Pot killing fields, and Idi Amin in Africa, and all these different what we call uncivilized people who would kill their own people. And during that same period of time in the United States, we killed our own people too. We slaughtered our children. We did not give them the air to breathe outside their bodies of their mothers. And the men are just as responsible as the women. The women say, we're going to decide whether we have children or not. But who's the one that's involved in that relationship? He's just as responsible. He may try to prevent that, and that's good. And the men ought to try to prevent that. But the United States Supreme Court says the woman has the rule or has the final decision on their bodies as to what's going to happen. It's horrible, horrible. And we ought to continue as the church in America to fight against that, to fight against this, and to do all we can to change people's minds, change their minds. You can change laws, but it's better to have their minds changed. And the best way to do that is to present them the gospel, to present them the truth of who Christ is, and to make sure then that they understand the value of life, the dignity of life, because their life is important, created in the image of the Creator. But now it's even much more beyond that. I have a purpose and a meaning for being here, and I have a purpose in which I can live a mentally, emotionally healthy life through this relationship with Jesus Christ and receiving His forgiveness and being born into His family. I have a whole new family. Not only do I have a biological family, I've got a whole new community of families that are supporting me. I'm supporting them. It's just a powerful creation of this new community as Jesus is the head of our family. So encourage people to do that. Encourage people to seek Him and to learn who He is through the Bible and through this community. Invite people to be a part of that. Now, that's number 3. Number 1, change of the culture, moving into urban centers. Number 2, marriage tanking, going down. Number 3 is this issue of fertility and childbearing. That's number 3. And now number 4. We're just going to briefly mention this, and we're going to deal with this again next time. Number 4, sexual permissiveness and the sexual identity issue. There's a lot of confusion over sexual identity, and you can imagine, since the fertility you can control fertility, women can control fertility. You can imagine what that's done to men and also to women in this idea of relationships with each other. Since the drift in our culture has been away from sexual relationships between men and women in a committed, lifelong relationship, there's also been a proliferation of sexual permissiveness and experimentation. Statistical research indicates that behaviors regarding human sexuality have changed, as we know, over the last 100 years. And now you can get all Psychology Today, it's a publication. You can get a lot. CDC's got a lot of data. Everybody's got a lot of data on the relationship, physical relationship between men and women. And since the 1930s in the United States, ideas about premarital sexual behavior has now included the acceptance of promiscuity, permissiveness in sexual relations between men and women. And cohabitation is another favorite term to go with that. The term when I was growing up in the 60s was shacking up. And all of that can be involved even before you have a marital commitment. Now, in addition to that, there is a cultural acceptance of experimental sexual relationships, such as homosexuality, bisexuality, transgenderism, polyamoryism. There's all these different kind of ways that men and women and women and women and men, experimenting with each other. Although this is really in the minority, and I just don't want to give the impression that there is a growing acceptance. That's the issue I think we need to face. So next time I want to go deeper into, I want to just rehash this idea of sexual permissiveness and sexual confusion. And I want us to look at the scriptures that are going to be dealing with the answer to that. And there's one in particular that is of great concern, not only to me, to others, and it's transgenderism. And I'll look at some references to that next time. Thank you so much for spending time with me. In the future, also, what are the values that Americans hold really today? Do we have any statistical data on what they really think is important? So there's been a lot of research on that. I don't know if I can get it all done. Probably can't. But I'll just throw some things out for you to consider, and maybe you will do your own research. You'll do your own work. But always take that. Always take this vast amount of studies that are being done on who we are as Americans and our behaviors and our trends and what we like and what we don't like, what we value, what we don't value. Always couch that in biblical truth. If you leave biblical truth, you're going to be a part of this drift in any particular direction. And you're going to be a part of the acceptance of a lot of these different ideologies that are totally harmful and not beneficial to anyone. So thank you for being with me. I look forward to getting together again, hopefully real soon.